Good morning, everybody. I'm Mouziengou from Gabon, Central Africa, and I'm a sign language interpreter since 2003. So today I will present a very important topic, sign language situation in my country, Gabon. But why this topic? Because many people don't really understand that there are different sign languages and that African sign languages, African indigenous sign languages must be developed. So during my presentation, I will uh, first of all speak about the history of sign language in Gabon, and I will also underline some difficulties of sign language in our country, and I will also propose some solution. Speaking about the history of sign language in Gabon, it's important to underline that uh, before 1982, there was no structure for deaf children in Gabon. There was no school, no support for families, no government policy in favor of this community. The arrival of Andrew Jackson Foster will be a very game changer because Foster introduced the deaf population of Gabon to American Sign Language. But before the arrival of Andrew Jackson Foster, deaf people used signs, used indigenous sign language. So this is very important to say. Now, the situation of sign language before the arrival of Dr. Johnson Foster, according to some deaf that I met, uh, there was no sign language in Gabon before he arrived. There are deaf people in Libreville made so-called natural gestures to make this understood. So there exists a kind of communication, a kind of indigenous sign language. But when just Foster came, he introduced the American Sign Language. So we are very grateful uh, to him because he bring education, but also American Sign Language. So speaking of Africa, it must be said that Gabon has also benefited to some extent from the expertise of Dr. Andrew Foster, like some African countries. So he founded the first school for deaf in Gabon in 1982, formerly called Efafata. So now we had the indigenous sign language that deaf use, and secondly, we have the American Sign Language introduced by Andrew Jackson first. And after that, uh, we will have the French Sign Language because we have the predominance of economic factors. That is to say that the government wanted to train teachers, deaf teachers, and those teachers are being sent to French countries as France or Cameroon. So after the training of deaf teachers, they came back and teach French and teach in French sign language. So that brings us to a sociolinguistic context. That is, we have the indigenous sign language, that is to say, the Gabonese sign language. We have the American Sign Language brought by Dr. Foster, and we have the French Sign Language. So Now, deaf people in Gabon are in that situation that in the school there are three different languages. So the teachers who have been trained in Gabonese Sign Language obviously use Gabonese Sign Language to teach. And those who have been trained in American Sign Language use also this language to teach. And also those who have been trained in French countries use French Sign Language to teach. So deaf are in that situation that there are three languages to have the knowledge. This is the situation in Gabon today. And according to some deaf, this is the consequences of the the fact that deaf people are not well educated. They don't understand very well that situation. Deaf people in Gabon used to say that we speak in Gabonese Sign Language and we want to use that language in the school. And also, according to some research, we conclude that uh, most of the deaf, 19% of deaf, use Gabonese Sign Language. That is to say that this is the language that we have to promote, to develop. But the situation is not is different. So now, in order to solve or to try to solve this situation, we have to to underline some difficulties that we have in Gabonese Sign Language. Unfortunately, we don't have documentation. We don't have dictionary in sign language. Because the fight that we have today is that those trained in French countries or in American countries to say that, oh, you Gabonese teacher, Gabonese sign language, you don't have documents, you don't have a dictionary. But how can we use a language without document? But we're in French countries. In French sign language, we have documents. So this is the case in the first difficulty that we have in Gabonese Sign Language. We have also the non-recognition of Gabonese Sign Language because the government or the authority didn't not yet recognize officially Gabonese Sign Language. So the solution are that we have to allow deaf people use their own sign language, the language that they can understand. And also, it is important to create a dictionary in Gabonese Sign Language. So, we don't have till now a Gabonese Sign Language, but it is a language that we use every time, but without document, without dictionary. And also, it is important that we propose the training of deaf and interpreters in Gabonese Sign Language. Why? Because deaf are the first one who have to defend, to protect the sign language, to protect the culture. So it is important that deaf people receive a training in order to know how to protect, how to develop, how to create a dictionary, how to create a document for to promote Gabonese Sign Language. And also interpreters. It is important that interpreters also receive the training. Why? Because normally, as an interpreter, I used to interpret in Gabonese Sign Language. It is true that I know American Sign Language and Gabonese Sign Language, but I prefer translating, interpreting in Gabonese sign language, because I know that this is the language that deaf people can understand. This is the language that deaf can really use to communicate. That is why I used to interpret in in Gabonese sign language, and uh, it is so important. So briefly, I can say that the situation we are here in Gabon, in our country, with three languages, it is not very. It is bad. This situation don't really help people to be really well educated. So, so now it is important that we work to have a unique sign language, a Gabonese sign language. But how? This is the question. How? By training. That's why I'm very happy to participate to this first conference dedicated to indigenous sign language. I think that we can make some action in order to develop, to promote the indigenous sign language. I think that this is the objective of this conference. And in our country, in Gabon, we also wait for your experience in order to help us to go and to promote our Gabonese sign language. So, in conclusion, we can say that Andrew Jackson Foster transmitted to the deaf people of Gabon the American Sign Language. So, in view of this immense change it has undergone, it become obvious to speak of Gabonese Sign Language because the Gabonese community rarely appropriate it. Now, the sociolinguistic context of sign language is a plurilingual context. Sign language will come from the presence of in Gabon of these three languages in linguistic environments of the deaf speaker. So two important languages that mean ASL and French Sign Language as a third sign language. So Gabonese Sign Language is now neglected. So in conclusion, the situation of sign language in Gabon is a case that we have to go to study deeply in order to propose solution as I said, but we cannot do it by only, but we can do it by the community and go far, promote the Gabonese sign language, promote the indigenous sign language. Thank you very much.